I've lived in New York City all my life, and I've gotten used to the strange things this city throws at you. Sirens at 3 in the morning, the sound of the subway rumbling under your building, the drunk guy on the corner yelling into the night like he's arguing with ghosts. That's all background noise to me now. But what happened on Orchard Street last winter is something I still can't explain. Something I still wake up from, covered in sweat, heart pounding every single night. It started when I moved into a tiny studio on the Lower East Side. The rent was way too good for New York standards. When the broker showed me the place, I immediately asked, "What's the catch?" She smiled politely, avoided my eyes, and said, "Oh, the last tenant left suddenly. Personal reasons. Nothing to worry about." The apartment itself was old, creaky wooden floors, a radiator that hissed like it was alive, and one single window that faced a brick wall. Not exactly charming, but I wasn't picky. I just needed a place of my own after a bad breakup. For the first week, everything seemed fine, except for one weird thing. Every night around 2:30 a.m., I would hear footsteps in the hallway. Heavy, slow, dragging footsteps like someone wearing boots. I assumed it was just a neighbor or some insomniac who couldn't sleep. But then I realized something. Those footsteps always stopped right outside my door. The first night it happened, I froze in bed, staring at the door, half expecting someone to knock. Nobody did. The footsteps just stopped, lingered, and then, after what felt like forever, slowly walked away. By the fourth night, I got brave enough to check through the peephole. But when I looked, the hallway was empty. I told myself maybe I had imagined the sound, but the goosebumps on my arms told me otherwise. One night, I couldn't take it anymore. I waited until the footsteps stopped outside my door, then swung it open as fast as I could. The hallway was pitch black. The motion sensor light that usually came on didn't. I stood there barefoot on the cold floor, my heart racing, staring down a hallway that felt way too quiet for a New York apartment building. And then, just as I was about to close the door, I swear I saw something at the very end of the hall, a tall, shadowy figure standing perfectly still facing me. I blinked, and it was gone. From that night on, things got worse. I started waking up to the sound of whispering. At first it was faint, almost like the radiator hissing, but then it grew clearer. I couldn't make out the words, but it was always the same low, urgent tone, like someone desperately trying to warn me about something. One night, I finally recorded it on my phone. When I played it back the next morning, my stomach dropped. There was no whispering. Instead, I heard a loud, deep voice that said just one word: "Leave." I tried to brush it off, telling myself maybe my phone glitched, maybe I picked up some radio interference. But then I noticed something else. Scratches on my front door. Thin, deep, claw-like marks that definitely weren't there before. My landlord swore nobody had been in the building maintenance-wise, and none of my neighbors admitted to hearing anything strange. The worst night came in late December, when New York was buried under a snowstorm. I remember because I was snowed in, alone, with no way of escaping the city. That night the footsteps came earlier, around midnight, louder than ever, shaking the floorboards. I stayed frozen in bed, clutching my blanket, when suddenly, the doorknob began to turn, slowly, like someone trying to open it as quietly as possible. I leapt out of bed, grabbed the heaviest thing I owned, a metal lamp, and screamed, "Who's there?" The knob stopped. Silence. Then, after a few seconds, the sound of retreating footsteps again. I didn't sleep at all. Instead, I sat by the door with the lamp in my hand, waiting for morning. When the sun finally came up, I opened the door to check. The hallway looked normal. But when I looked down, I saw something that made me nearly collapse. In the thin layer of dust on the wooden floor outside my door, there were footprints. Not boot prints, not shoes, bare feet. Long, wide, with what looked like claws at the end of each toe. I tried to convince myself maybe it was some prank. Maybe someone was messing with me. But deep down, I knew this wasn't human. That day, I started researching Orchard Street's history, desperate for answers. What I found chilled me to the bone. The building I lived in had once been a tenement in the early 1900s, housing dozens of poor immigrant families. And apparently, in 1927, there had been a series of unsolved murders in the very same building. Families butchered in their apartments with no sign of forced entry. The newspapers called the killer the Shadow Man, because survivors swore they saw a tall, dark figure standing in the corner before the attacks. The murderer was never caught. I wanted to believe it was just urban legend, some old ghost story. But then I found something even worse. A black and white photo of the hallway from the 1920s. Same wooden floors, same crooked light fixture, same exact scratches on the doors. That night I decided to sleep with the lights on. I told myself, it's just one more night, then I'll break the lease and get the hell out of here. But as I lay there staring at the ceiling, I realized the footsteps hadn't come. For the first time in weeks, the hallway was quiet. Relief washed over me, and I slowly drifted off. When I woke up, I wasn't in my bed. I was lying in the hallway right outside my apartment door, my body freezing on the wooden floor. The door behind me was wide open, and standing at the very end of the hallway, just like before, was that tall, shadowy figure. Only this time, it wasn't still. It was moving toward me. And that's when I realized the whispers weren't warning me. They were luring me. If you've ever lived in New York City, you know the subway is its own world. It's loud, dirty, unpredictable, and at night, it feels almost alive. I've ridden those trains at every hour, but nothing prepared me for what happened one winter night on the F train. It was late, past midnight, and I was heading home from a double shift bartending in Brooklyn. The platforms were half empty, echoing with that eerie hum of electricity and dripping water. The kind of atmosphere that makes you check over your shoulder, even when you know you're safe. When the train pulled up, only 2 cars were lit. I chose the one closest to me and stepped inside. There were just 3 people, an older man dozing with a shopping bag on his lap, a teenager with headphones, and a woman sitting directly across from me. I noticed her immediately. She was dressed strangely for the weather. No coat, just a thin black dress that looked decades out of style. Her skin was pale, almost gray under the harsh fluorescent lights, and her hair hung loose, covering part of her face. Something about her posture struck me. Too stiff, too deliberate. I tried not to stare, but it was impossible. Every time I glanced at her, I realized she was already looking at me. Not just looking, staring. Her eyes didn't blink, didn't shift. Just locked on mine. At first, I thought maybe she was high or mentally unstable. That's not exactly rare in the city. But then she smiled. Slow, unnatural, like she had just remembered a secret. And when her lips moved, I swear I heard her whisper my name. I jerked my head up, shocked. I hadn't told anyone on the train my name, hadn't spoken a word. I tried to shake it off, telling myself I was just tired, hearing things. But the more I looked at her, the more I realized something was wrong. Her dress, it wasn't just old-fashioned. It looked old, like actual fabric from another time. Stained, frayed, falling apart at the seams. The train screeched into the next station. The doors opened, but nobody got off. Nobody got on either. Except, when the doors closed, the teenager and the old man were gone. Just gone. I blinked, rubbed my eyes, even stood up to look around. The seats were empty. Now it was just me and the woman. The train jolted forward, lights flickering overhead. She tilted her head, still smiling, and whispered again. Only this time I heard the words clearly. You shouldn't be here. I felt my stomach drop. I wanted to get off at the next stop, but when the train slowed down, the windows showed nothing but endless tunnels. No platform. No station. Just darkness stretching on forever. Panic set in. I stumbled down the car, trying to get to the next one. The connecting door wouldn't budge. I slammed on it, pulled with all my strength, but it was locked tight. When I turned back, she was standing. Closer. Her eyes were wide now, unblinking. Her face pale as chalk. She whispered again, but this time her voice was louder, echoing unnaturally in the empty car. "You shouldn't be here." I pressed myself against the door, heart racing, and then the lights went out completely. For what felt like forever, the train was nothing but sound. The grinding of wheels, the screech of metal on metal, and beneath it all, breathing. Not mine, not hers. Something else in the dark. Heavy, labored breathing. Right next to me. When the lights flickered back on, the woman was gone. The car was empty. I stood there, shaking, unsure if I was losing my mind. Then I noticed something scratched into the seat where she had been sitting. 4 words, carved deep into the plastic. "Next stop is yours." Before I could even process what that meant, the train screeched to a halt. The doors opened, not to a platform, but to a pitch-black tunnel, and standing there in the doorway was the woman again. Only this time her face wasn't human. Her mouth stretched impossibly wide, her jaw unhinged like a snake's, teeth jagged and broken. Her eyes were nothing but empty black sockets, leaking shadows. She raised a hand and pointed at me. I stumbled backward, shouting, "No, no, no!" But the force of the train seemed to pull me forward, like gravity itself was trying to drag me out. The lights flickered again, and for a split second, I swear I saw hundreds of shadowy figures crammed into the car. Faces twisted, mouths open in silent screams, and every single one of them was staring at me. Then the lights cut out. When they came back on, I was sitting at my stop in Manhattan. Normal station, normal people stepping onto the platform. The train car looked perfectly ordinary. No scratches on the seats, no sign of anyone but me. I thought maybe I had hallucinated the whole thing. But when I got up to leave, something fell from my lap onto the floor. A scrap of black fabric. Old, frayed, and stained with something dark. I picked it up with shaking hands. And that's when I realized the fabric wasn't just old. It smelled like damp earth. Like something that had been buried for a long, long time. I've always been a skeptic. Ghost stories, urban legends, haunted houses, I chalked them all up to imagination, paranoia, or people just craving attention. That was before last year, when I rented a brownstone apartment in Harlem. What happened there broke every rule of logic I believed in. To this day I can't explain it, and part of me wishes I never tried. The brownstone was beautiful from the outside. Red brick, iron railings, tall windows with arched frames. It had that old New York charm, the kind you see in movies. The landlord, an older guy named Mr. Halpern, seemed almost too eager to get me into the place. He offered a lower deposit if I could move in fast, said the last tenant had left in a hurry. I didn't question it, I needed a home, and it felt like a good deal. My unit was on the 2nd floor. The apartment had high ceilings, creaky wooden floors, and an old fireplace that didn't work. But the strangest part was a door at the end of the hallway inside my apartment, a narrow wooden door with a rusted lock. When I asked Mr. Halpern about it, he shrugged and said, "Storage closet, been locked for years. Don't bother with it." That should have been my first red flag, but I let it slide. Everyone in New York has secrets, right? For the first few weeks, nothing unusual happened. I was busy with work, often coming home late, collapsing into bed and barely noticing my surroundings. But then around the 3rd week I started hearing noises, soft, rhythmic tapping, like fingernails against wood, always coming from behind the locked door. At first I thought it was rats. Old buildings like that are crawling with them. But the sound was too deliberate. 3 taps, pause, 3 taps again, almost like a pattern. I told myself I was imagining it, until the night I came home early. As I unlocked my apartment, I heard it clearly, tapping from inside, then a low voice, whispering. I froze in the hallway, heart hammering in my chest. I couldn't make out the words, but it was definitely a voice. Slow, hushed, like someone was trying to talk through the door. The next morning I asked Mr. Halpern again about the locked room. He snapped this time, his tone sharp. "It's nothing. Don't go near it. You hear me?" That night the tapping grew louder. I couldn't take it anymore. I pressed my ear against the door. What I heard made my blood run cold. Someone, or something, was breathing on the other side. I stumbled back, trying to convince myself it was all in my head. But the next morning I noticed something new. The lock on the door, rusty, ancient, untouched, looked slightly scratched, like someone had been trying to open it from the inside. Days passed, and I became obsessed. Every night, I sat in the hallway, staring at that door, waiting for the sound. Sometimes it was tapping, sometimes whispering, sometimes just silence that felt heavier than any noise. Finally, I snapped. I bought a crowbar and decided to open the damn thing. It was a rainy Saturday afternoon. The whole apartment was dim, shadows stretching across the walls. I pried at the lock, sweating, cursing under my breath until the metal finally gave way. The door creaked open slowly, releasing a smell so foul I gagged like damp earth mixed with rot. The room inside was tiny. No furniture, no windows, just peeling wallpaper and a dirt-stained floor. At first it looked empty, but then I saw the carvings. Every inch of the walls was covered in scratch marks, words etched deep into the plaster. Over and over, the same sentence. "Don't let him out." My chest tightened. I backed out, slammed the door shut, and shoved a chair against it. My hands were shaking uncontrollably. Who had written that? What did it mean? That night, I didn't sleep. The whispers came back, louder than ever. Not one voice this time, many, overlapping, desperate, begging me to listen. And through the noise, I heard something else. A slow creak, like wood bending under pressure. The door. It was opening. I grabbed the chair, shoved it harder against the knob. But the force from the other side was stronger. The wood splintered, the lock rattled, and for the first time I heard words clearly. A deep, guttural voice, nothing human, growling from the other side. "Free me." I ran out of the apartment barefoot, down the stairs into the street, rain soaking me to the bone. I didn't stop until I reached a friend's place downtown. I swore I'd never go back, but curiosity got the better of me. A week later, I returned to grab my stuff. The building was quiet. Too quiet. When I opened my door, my stomach dropped. The hallway was empty. The door at the end? Gone. Not broken, not open, just gone. Like it had never existed. I stood there in shock, trying to make sense of it. Then I noticed something carved into the floor, where the door used to be. Deep, jagged letters. "Thank you." And as I turned to leave, I saw muddy footprints, leading from the spot where the door had been, straight into my bedroom. New Yorkers are used to weird things in Central Park. You've got the late-night joggers who never seem to sleep, the eccentric street performers practicing in the shadows, and the occasional raccoon bold enough to steal food from your hands. But what I saw one fall evening wasn't weird, it was something darker. Something that still makes me avoid that park after sundown, no matter how late my shift runs. It started when I picked up dog walking gigs to make extra money. My route took me along the southern edge of the park, near 59th Street. Most of my clients wanted their dogs walked late at night after work, which meant I was often the only person wandering the pathways at odd hours. At first, I didn't mind. The park had its own kind of magic at night, lampposts glowing like fireflies, the city noise muffled by trees, the occasional distant saxophone drifting from a subway entrance. But one night, around 11:45, I noticed something strange. I was walking a husky named Cooper near the pond when I saw a man standing perfectly still under one of the lamps. Tall, thin, wearing an old-fashioned coat that looked too long, almost dragging on the ground. His head was tilted slightly like he was watching me. I slowed down, uneasy. New York is full of oddballs, sure, but something about him didn't feel right. His face was in shadow, but I could sense his eyes locked on me. Cooper growled low in his throat, fur bristling, which he never did. I tugged his leash, muttering, "Come on, boy, let's go." When I looked back, the man was gone. I tried to shake it off. Maybe I imagined it. Maybe it was just a tired jogger catching his breath. But the next night he was there again. Same spot, same posture. Watching. This time I decided to test something. I stopped walking, pretending to adjust Cooper's harness, and kept my eyes fixed on the man. For nearly a minute he didn't move, didn't blink, just stood there. Then, without warning, the lamp above him flickered and went out. When it came back on, he was gone. I didn't sleep well that night. The following week I started seeing him in different places, sometimes near the Bethesda fountain, sometimes by the Ramble, once even perched on a bridge like a statue. Always the same long coat. Always staring. I mentioned it to one of my clients, a woman who had lived near the park for decades. Her face went pale. She said, "You saw him too?" I asked what she meant. She told me about a local legend, the Night Watcher. Supposedly, since the late 1800s, people had reported seeing a strange man in the park after midnight. Some said he followed them home. Others claimed he never moved, just stood and watched. A few even swore he whispered their names. Most dismissed it as urban myth. But the woman's voice shook when she said, "Everyone I knew who saw him. Something bad happened to them not long after." I laughed it off in front of her, but inside, dread was gnawing at me. That Friday I was walking Cooper again, this time near the mall. The park was nearly deserted, the trees swaying in the autumn wind. That's when I heard it. A voice, low and raspy, drifting on the breeze. My name. I spun around, but nobody was there. The path behind me was empty. The lamps flickered one by one, until the only light left was the one directly above me. Cooper whimpered, tugging at the leash, desperate to leave. And then I saw him. Not far ahead, standing in the middle of the path, his head tilted, his coat swaying slightly though there was no wind. His face was still hidden, but this time he raised a hand and pointed directly at me. I ran. I didn't care where. I just sprinted, Cooper straining at the leash, my lungs burning. When I finally reached the street, I glanced back. The path was empty. I told myself I'd never take another night shift walking dogs again, but fate had other plans. The next evening, I got a last-minute request from a client on the Upper West Side. Good money. I hesitated, but greed won. I took the job. Halfway through the walk, near Bow Bridge, my phone died. Dead black screen, though it had been at 60%. The park was too quiet, the kind of silence that hums in your ears. And then Cooper froze. His leash went taut. He growled, teeth bared. I followed his gaze, and my stomach dropped. The watcher wasn't far. This time his face was visible under the lamp, pale, gaunt, eyes completely black. His mouth stretched into a grin that didn't look human. And when he whispered, I heard it clearly. I'm already inside. Inside what? I didn't understand. I dragged Cooper back, sprinted toward the street, and didn't stop until I was in the middle of Broadway, surrounded by honking taxis and yelling pedestrians. I swore that was the end of it. But when I got home, exhausted, trembling, I noticed something that made me collapse to the floor. On my window, the second-story window of my apartment, a handprint. Large, pale, smudged against the glass. And drawn beneath it, with what looked like dirt or ash, was a single word. Watching. I've lived in New York most of my life, and if there's one thing people here are obsessed with, it's housing. Finding an affordable apartment in this city feels like winning the lottery. That's why, when I stumbled on a listing for a one-bedroom in Brooklyn Heights at a price that seemed too good to be true, I didn't ask many questions. I signed the lease the same day. The building was one of those pre-war brownstones that had been chopped into small apartments. Narrow staircases, high ceilings, crooked floors. My unit was on the 4th floor. The landlord, a strange middle-aged guy named Vincent, gave me the keys with an odd smile and said, "Welcome to the family. Just don't go higher than the 4th floor." I laughed, thinking he meant the roof was off limits. But later, when I explored, I noticed something strange. The staircase didn't stop at the 4th floor. It kept going up, a dusty set of steps that led to what looked like another landing above mine. When I asked Vincent about it, he shrugged. Just storage, sealed off years ago. Nothing up there you need to worry about. But of course, that only made me more curious. The first few weeks in the apartment were uneventful. The place was old, sure, creaky pipes, flickering lights, but nothing unusual. Then one night, coming home late from work, I saw something odd. A light, coming from the landing above my floor. I stood there, frozen, staring at the faint glow leaking through the cracks in the old wooden door that blocked off the supposed storage area. It wasn't strong, more like candlelight than electricity. I tried the knob, but it was locked tight. That was the beginning. Every night after that, I noticed the glow. Sometimes it flickered like fire. Sometimes it pulsed like it was alive. And sometimes, when the building was dead quiet, I swore I could hear footsteps above me. Slow, deliberate pacing back and forth across the ceiling. One night, I decided to press my ear against the ceiling of my bedroom. I nearly screamed when I heard it, someone humming. A low, tuneless hum drifting down through the floorboards. I told myself it had to be pipes, maybe sound carrying weirdly. But deep down, I knew. Someone, or something, was up there. The real horror began 2 weeks later. I was heading upstairs one evening when I noticed the building felt wrong. The air was heavy, like walking through fog. My feet dragged against the steps. And when I reached my landing, my heart nearly stopped. The sealed door to the storage floor was wide open. I stood there in shock. The glow I had seen before now blazed from inside, lighting up the hallway in an eerie golden hue. Against every instinct screaming at me to turn around, I stepped closer. Inside was a staircase leading up into darkness. But the strange thing was, it didn't look dusty or abandoned. The wood looked polished, the air smelled faintly of flowers, and faint music drifted down, like an old gramophone playing far away. I don't know why, but I climbed. The staircase twisted higher than the building should have allowed, step after step, until I lost track of how long I'd been walking. Finally, I reached another landing. It was an apartment, fully furnished, but not like anything from today. The furniture was antique, the wallpaper yellowed, and a chandelier hung low, swaying slightly though there was no breeze. At the center of the room sat a family, a man, a woman, and 2 children, all dressed in clothing straight out of the 1920s. They were perfectly still, smiling, staring at me. Sorry, I stammered. I must have gotten turned around. The man's smile widened. His lips cracked as if they hadn't moved in years. Then he spoke, his voice hollow, echoing too much for the size of the room. Welcome home. The children giggled, the sound brittle, like glass breaking. My chest tightened. I stumbled back, desperate to leave. But when I turned, the staircase was gone. The door was gone. All that remained was more of the apartment, endless rooms stretching into darkness. I ran, darting through one doorway after another, but every room looked the same. Same wallpaper, same chandelier, same smiling family waiting for me. At some point, I must have blacked out, because the next thing I remember is waking up in my bed. My door locked, the building quiet. For a brief moment I convinced myself it was a nightmare, until I noticed something on my nightstand. An old photograph, sepia-toned, edges frayed. It showed the same family I had seen upstairs, the man, the woman, the children. Only this time there was a 5th figure in the picture, me, standing among them, and written on the back, in elegant, faded script, 5th floor, apartment B. The problem? There was no 5th floor in my building. At least, there isn't supposed to be. If you've lived in New York long enough, the subway becomes second nature. You know the smell of damp concrete, the screech of the brakes, the way the lights flicker when the train roars through. For most people, it's routine. But for me, one late night on the F line, That routine turned into something I've never been able to explain, something that still wakes me in cold sweats. It was around 1:30 a.m., and I was heading home from a late shift in Manhattan. The platform at Delancey Street was nearly empty, just me and an older man sitting at the far end, muttering to himself. When the train arrived, the doors opened with their usual hiss. I stepped inside, expecting a few stragglers scattered across the car. But the train was completely empty. That wasn't unusual for the hour, but there was something about the silence that immediately unnerved me. No distant chatter, no crinkle of a paper bag, not even the faint hum of headphones. Just me, the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, and the rhythmic rattle of the tracks. We pulled out of Delancey and headed deeper into Brooklyn. I sat, scrolling through my phone until I realized something strange. The train wasn't slowing down. We blew past East Broadway, then York Street, then J Street Metrotech. No announcement, no brakes squealing, nothing. Just darkness whipping by the windows. I frowned, glancing up at the map above the doors. At this point, we should have stopped, but the train just kept going. At first, I thought maybe it was express service. It happens sometimes. But when we passed 4 stations in a row without stopping, my chest tightened. I walked down the car to check if maybe there was a conductor. Every car I entered was the same, completely empty. No driver, no conductor, no one, just me. I tried pulling the emergency brake, but the lever wouldn't budge. My phone had no signal underground, of course. I was trapped in a subway car, hurtling through darkness with no way out. Minutes turned into what felt like hours. I pressed my forehead to the glass, trying to catch a glimpse of where we were, but the tunnels outside seemed wrong. The concrete walls looked old, not in the usual graffiti-covered, water-stained way. Older, like crumbling brickwork, like tunnels that hadn't been used in decades. Then I saw it. A station, but not one I recognized. The train slowed as we pulled in, and I finally heard the brakes screech. Relief washed over me for a moment, until I looked at the platform. It wasn't a real station. Not anymore. The tiles were cracked and discolored, the station name long faded. Wooden benches sat rotting against the wall. Rusted metal signs hung crooked from the ceiling. And scattered across the platform were people. At least, I thought they were people. They stood perfectly still, facing the train, their faces hidden in shadow. Their clothes were wrong too, outdated, tattered, as if they had been standing there since the 1920s. None of them moved, none of them blinked. The doors opened with a soft chime. I didn't move. Neither did they. We just stared at each other across the gap. Then slowly, one of them lifted an arm and pointed directly at me. That was enough. I bolted for the far end of the car, jamming the close door button like my life depended on it. The doors slid shut just as one of the figures stepped forward, its head tilting unnaturally as if its neck had snapped. The train lurched forward again, plunging back into the tunnels. My heart was racing, my palms slick with sweat. I kept thinking I'd wake up, that this had to be some sleep-deprived hallucination. But the smell, the cold metal, the vibrations under my feet, it was all too real. The next station we approached wasn't any better. Same crumbling design, same silent figures waiting on the platform. Again, the doors opened. Again, they pointed at me. It kept happening. Station after station. The same figures, the same eerie silence, the same gesture. Pointing. Always pointing. I don't know how long it went on. My phone battery died at some point. Time felt meaningless. I was trapped in a loop, an endless nightmare on rails. And then, finally, the train slowed at a station I recognized. 7th Avenue in Brooklyn. The lights inside flickered violently, the hum of the engine sputtered, and for a terrifying second I thought the whole thing would vanish before my eyes. But when the doors opened, I didn't hesitate. I ran. The platform was normal. People waiting, scrolling on their phones, yawning into their coffee cups. The ordinary world, like nothing had happened. When I turned back, the train was gone. Not just pulling away, gone. Vanished. As if it had never been there at all. I stood there shaking, trying to calm my breath. Nobody else seemed to notice. They just carried on, oblivious, as if I hadn't just stepped out of hell. The next day I went looking. I searched forums, old subway maps, history blogs, and I found something that made my stomach drop. Back in the early 20th century, there was a proposed line that was partially built but never completed. They abandoned it after a collapse killed several workers. Some say the tunnels still exist beneath the city, sealed off and forgotten. Others claim the workers never left, that they're still down there waiting for the trains that never came. I haven't taken the F line at night since, and sometimes when I'm walking near Delancey Street, I swear I hear it, the rattle of a train deep underground. But when I check the schedule, nothing's supposed to be running. I moved to New York when I was 23, chasing the same dream as everyone else. Cheap rent, a steady job, and the hope of carving out a little space in a city that doesn't care if you exist. I landed in a creaky old apartment building in Washington Heights, the kind of place with paper-thin walls, radiators that screamed in winter, and elevators that seemed like they could snap at any second. It wasn't much, but it was mine. I lived on the 4th floor, in a narrow one-bedroom with a view of the alley. Across the hall was apartment 4B, and for the first few months, I never saw anyone come or go. No neighbors carrying groceries, no laughter behind the door, not even music. Just silence. But every night around midnight I'd hear noises, soft thuds, dragging sounds, sometimes muffled voices that never quite made sense. At first I thought it was just the building settling or maybe the plumbing. But one night, while I was heading up the stairs late from work, I saw something that made my skin crawl. The door to 4B was open, not wide, just a crack, enough for me to see that the inside was completely dark. No light, no furniture silhouettes, nothing. Just blackness, as though the apartment were a hollow void. I paused, listening, and that's when I heard it. A whisper. It was faint, like someone calling my name from a mile away, but I knew it was directed at me. My heart hammered as I rushed into my own place and locked the door. I didn't sleep that night. Days turned into weeks, and the sounds only got stranger. Sometimes, I'd wake at 3 a.m. to faint knocking, not on my door, but from inside the walls themselves, like something was trying to get out. Other times, I'd find small things in front of my door, a marble, a child's shoelace, once even a rusty key. I asked the landlord about 4B. He brushed me off, saying it was under renovation and no one lived there. But that didn't explain the noises. It didn't explain the objects. And it sure didn't explain the night I saw a figure standing in the hallway. It was late, past 2 a.m. I had gone to throw out some trash. When I turned back toward my door, I froze. Someone was standing outside 4B. Tall, thin, head bowed. They weren't moving. They weren't breathing. They just stood there, motionless, like a shadow cast in flesh. I tried to convince myself it was a trick of the dim hallway light, but then they lifted their head, and I swear, their face was blurred, like static on an old television. No eyes, no mouth, just shifting distortion. I bolted inside and slammed the lock shut, pressing my ear against the door. For a long time, I heard nothing, but just as I started to relax, there it was again, a whisper. This time, right outside my door. The next morning, I told myself I'd imagined it. Sleep deprivation, stress, city madness. I even avoided looking at 4B for a while, forcing myself to treat it as just another empty apartment. But deep down, I knew better. And then one night, everything came to a head. I was lying in bed staring at the ceiling when the knocking started again. Slow, methodical, from behind my wall. I sat up, my pulse pounding, and grabbed the baseball bat I kept by the bed. The knocking grew louder, faster, until it sounded like someone was slamming both fists against the wall. I couldn't take it anymore. I stormed into the hallway, ready to confront whoever, or whatever, was in there. The door to 4B was wide open. Inside, the apartment was pitch black, but I could feel cold air spilling out, unnatural and heavy. Against every instinct, I stepped inside. My phone's flashlight cut through the dark, revealing peeling wallpaper, cracked floors, and something worse, photographs. Hundreds of them. They were pinned to the walls, scattered across the floor, stuffed into broken drawers. And every single one of them was of me. Me leaving my apartment. Me carrying groceries. Me sleeping, taken from outside my window. Some were recent. Some were from months ago. My stomach dropped. My mind raced. Someone had been watching me this whole time. But how? No one ever went in or out. The landlord swore it was empty. That's when I heard breathing. Slow, heavy, right behind me. I spun around, and in the glow of my flashlight, I saw them. The same tall, thin figure from before. Their face still blurred, still shifting. But this time, they were closer. Too close. I stumbled backward, tripping over the scattered photos, my phone flying from my hand. In the darkness, the breathing grew louder, the footsteps closing in. I scrambled to my feet and bolted out the door, slamming mine shut behind me. I didn't sleep that night or the next. The landlord eventually replaced the lock on 4B, and when I demanded answers, he gave me the same tired line. It's vacant. Always has been. But if that were true, then who was in there? Who took those photos? And here's the part I can't explain. Last week I came home to find a photo slipped under my door. It was me, standing in the hallway, outside 4B. Taken that very night. The thing is, I never stood there. Central Park has always been my escape from the chaos of New York. I moved to the city from upstate in 2018, and whenever the noise, the people, the endless grind became too much, I'd wander into the park at night. It sounds reckless, I know. It's not exactly the safest place after dark, but there was something about the stillness, the way the city lights framed the trees, that made me feel like I could breathe again. That changed last fall. I'd been at a friend's apartment on the Upper West Side, and around midnight I decided to cut through the park to head home. The air was cool, crisp with the smell of fallen leaves. The usual joggers and late-night dog walkers were gone. It was just me, the lamplight, and the winding paths. As I passed by the ramble, I heard something. At first it was faint, like a child's laughter carried on the wind. I stopped, scanning the trees, but there was no one, just shadows shifting under the branches. I told myself it was nothing, kept walking. But then I heard it again. Louder this time. A giggle, high-pitched, unmistakably close. "Hello?" I called out. Silence. I tightened my jacket and quickened my pace, but the laughter followed me, echoing from behind the trees, always just out of sight. My stomach knotted with unease, but part of me was curious. Against my better judgment, I veered off the path and into the woods. The deeper I went, the stranger it felt. The air grew colder, damp, like stepping into a cellar. The city noise, the cars, the horns, the distant hum of life, faded until there was nothing but the crunch of my own footsteps. My phone's flashlight barely cut through the dark, and I kept turning, convinced I'd see someone dart between the trees. Then I found the clearing. In the middle of the ramble was a circle of children, at least a dozen of them, holding hands, swaying back and forth. Their clothes were old-fashioned, wool coats, suspenders, dresses that looked straight out of the early 1900s. None of them spoke. None of them blinked. I froze, my breath fogging in the cold air. Every instinct screamed at me to leave, but I couldn't move. My legs felt rooted to the ground. Then, all at once, they stopped swaying. Slowly, in perfect unison, the children turned their heads toward me. Their eyes were pitch black. I stumbled back, my flashlight shaking in my hand. One of the children, a little girl with braids, stepped forward. Her mouth opened, but instead of words, a guttural, inhuman sound poured out, like metal grinding against metal. The others joined in, the noise rising into a shriek that made my ears ring. I bolted, branches whipped against my face, my lungs burning as I sprinted back toward the path. I didn't look back until I reached the streetlights at 72nd Street, gasping for air, my heart racing. The park was empty, silent, as if nothing had happened. I didn't sleep that night. I kept replaying it in my head, telling myself it was a hallucination, a trick of exhaustion. But deep down I knew what I'd seen. And then came the dreams. For weeks afterward, I had nightmares of those children, standing in a circle, staring at me with those black, empty eyes. In one dream, they surrounded my bed, whispering in voices I couldn't understand. In another, I was one of them, trapped, holding hands, swaying endlessly in the dark. I tried to forget. I stopped going near the park. But one day, curiosity got the better of me. I started researching. It didn't take long to find the stories. Back in the late 1800s, before Central Park was built, the land was home to several small communities. One of them, known as Seneca Village, was cleared out when the city seized the land. Families were forced to leave their homes behind. But there are darker tales too. Rumors of children who went missing during the transition, who were never accounted for. Some say their bodies were buried where the Ramble now stands. I tried to dismiss it as folklore. But the more I read, the worse it got. Paranormal forums were full of accounts eerily similar to mine. People hearing laughter at night, seeing children in old clothes, being lured into the woods only to find themselves lost for hours. One post in particular chilled me to the bone. It was from a man who claimed he'd been followed home after encountering the children. He described hearing whispers outside his apartment door at night, objects moving on their own, and eventually waking up to find photographs of himself, taken while he slept. The last line of his post has been burned into my brain ever since. They don't want you to see them. They want you to join them. And here's the part that keeps me awake now. 2 nights ago, I was walking back from work, cutting down Amsterdam Avenue when I heard it. That same laugh. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. Slowly, I turned my head toward a nearby alley, and standing there, half hidden in the shadows, was the little girl with braids. She smiled at me. I was in New York for a work conference 2 years ago, staying at a hotel in Midtown. It wasn't one of the fancy ones near Times Square, but an older place tucked between 2 modern glass towers, the kind of building you'd walk past without even noticing. The outside was plain brick, the sign faded, the lobby dim and outdated with a faint smell of mildew. It wasn't glamorous, but it was cheap, and I figured all I needed was a bed and a shower. I checked in late in the evening, after a long day of panels. The woman at the front desk was oddly quiet, barely looking at me as she slid the key across the counter. It wasn't even a key card, just an old brass key on a heavy ring with the number 7B engraved into it. I thought that was strange, but I was too tired to care. The elevator creaked and groaned as it carried me up to the 7th floor. The hallway smelled like dust and stale cigarettes. The carpet was threadbare, patterned with ugly swirls, and the light bulbs flickered in their sconces. I counted the doors, 7A, 7C, 7D. There was no 7B. I walked back and forth down the hall twice, convinced I'd missed it. But the numbers skipped straight from 7A to 7C. Confused, I headed back toward the elevator, thinking I'd ask the front desk if there'd been a mistake. That's when I noticed the door at the very end of the hallway. It didn't have a number. The paint was peeling, and the doorknob was tarnished like it hadn't been touched in years. Something about it made me stop. Slowly, I pulled out the key and tried it. It turned smoothly in the lock. The door opened into complete darkness. I stepped inside, fumbling for the light switch. When the lamp flickered on, my stomach dropped. The room was wrong. The furniture was old-fashioned, like something out of the 1940s. An iron bed frame, a rotary phone, heavy drapes that smelled of dust. The wallpaper was yellowed and peeling, and the air was freezing, colder than the hallway outside. It felt less like a hotel room and more like a place someone had abandoned decades ago. Still, I was exhausted. I locked the door, set my bag down, and collapsed onto the bed. The springs creaked beneath me, but I didn't care. Within minutes, I was drifting off. Then I heard it. A knock. Soft, deliberate, on the wall behind the bed. I held my breath, waiting. Another knock came, louder this time, followed by a faint dragging sound, like furniture being moved in the room next to mine. But according to the floor plan in the elevator, there shouldn't have been a room there. I told myself it was pipes, or the building settling. Anything but what it sounded like. I forced myself to sleep. When I woke up the next morning, something was different. My suitcase, which I'd left zipped by the door, was sitting open in the middle of the floor. My clothes had been laid out neatly on the bed, as if someone had arranged them while I slept. My heart hammered as I searched the room, checking the closet, the bathroom, under the bed. Empty. The door was still locked from the inside. Shaken, I packed my things and left for the conference. All day, I tried to convince myself I'd imagined it. Maybe I'd been so tired I'd forgotten unpacking. Maybe I'd sleepwalked. But deep down, I didn't believe that. That night, I returned reluctantly to 7B. The moment I opened the door, I noticed something new. A photograph sat on the nightstand, black and white, slightly curled at the edges. It showed a man and a woman standing in that very room, dressed in 1940s clothing. Neither of them was smiling. Their eyes were dark, hollow, almost too dark for the photograph. I didn't touch it. I barely slept. Every time I started to drift off, I'd hear whispers, not from the hallway, not from outside, but from inside the room. Low voices, murmuring just below the edge of comprehension. Once I swore I felt the weight of someone sit on the bed beside me. But when I turned on the lamp, the room was empty. The next morning, I went to the front desk. I told the woman there about the noises, the photo, how wrong the room felt. She stared at me blankly, then said, "Sir, there is no room 7B. I insisted, pulling out the brass key. She frowned, then shook her head. "We switched to key cards years ago. That doesn't belong here." I tried to argue, but she cut me off and refused to discuss it further. I went back upstairs to prove it to myself. But when I reached the 7th floor, the unmarked door was gone. The hallway ended at 7C. It was as if the room had never existed. I barely remember leaving the hotel. I booked another place that night and never looked back. But here's the part I can't explain. A week later, when I was home unpacking, I found something in my bag. That photograph. The one from the nightstand. And this time there were 3 people in it. The man, the woman, and me, standing between them.